I don't really rate books, so when Goodreads asks me for a rating when I click finished, I kind of just click a star. Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I will be doing my favorite video of the year, my yearly reading stats. I love stats. I'm a huge stats nerd, so let's get into it. Starting with my Goodreads kind of stuff. The most popular book I read according to Goodreads was Educated. Quite a few people have either read or anticipate to read this book. I feel like a lot of people have probably shelved this as want to read but haven't actually read it. But I don't know. It is a pretty popular book, so I would take it with a grain of salt, I guess. The least popular book I read according to Goodreads was Sluts and Whores by C.E. Hoffman. It has only been shelved by 60 other people. That kind of makes sense to me. It's the only independently published book I read this year. Independently published books tend to not be as popular because they don't have a huge publishing house behind them to push them in marketing, so that makes sense. My average rating according to Goodreads was 4.3. Again, take that with a grain of salt because I don't really rate books, so when Goodreads asks me for a rating when I click finished, I kind of just click a star. So, I mean, that kind of feels somewhat right. I did like a lot of what I read. I am a pretty easy rater, but I don't really like rating books, so take that as you will. And then the highest rated book I read according to Goodreads was Sluts and Whores. Once again, it had a 4.72 star rating. Again, this makes sense to me. Being independently published, the people who did find it were probably seeking it out. So it was, exactly what they wanted. It wasn't marketed to them, so they found it and found it intriguing because it was exactly what they were looking for. So that's all the Goodreads stats I'm gonna do. The rest of these are gonna be the stats that I compile myself from my own spreadsheet. I have a couple videos on my spreadsheet and how I use it and how it works if you want to check those out, but I will just be showing you the stats and the graphs that I compile from it. I read a total of 65 books this year. My month with the most read books was May, in which I read 9 books. The month in which I read the least books was June. The next one in which I read 2. So, you win some, you lose some. My average page length of a book was 350 pages. My median page length was 358. This is including audiobooks, I believe, because I didn't want to do a bunch of if statements to get rid of the audiobooks. So this does include audiobooks, but the shortest book I read with my eyeballs was Galatea. It is 20 pages. And the longest book I read with my eyeballs was Crooked Kingdom, which is 561 pages. My most read genre was fantasy. I will scoot over so you can see my genre breakdown graph. Let me pull it up so I can also see it. So 21.7% fantasy, 7% fiction, 5.8% historical fiction. You can read these. I don't need to read out the percentages to you. But my most read was fantasy, followed by nonfiction, and then thriller and romance and kind of even breakdowns from there. 40% of the books I read this year were audiobook. 50% of the books I read this year I borrowed from the library. Of the books I read, I spent $358.88 and I saved using the library $492.20. So now we'll just get into straight graphs, starting with my series graph. Again, take this one with a bit of a grain of salt because I wasn't always confident if something was a standalone or if it was the start of a series, but most of what I read is a standalone. That makes sense to me because I read so much nonfiction. I don't know. Does that make sense to me? I might be way off on this standalone number. Okay, I just double checked. I do feel pretty good about these numbers. So most of what I read was standalone. I started a lot of series and I continued a lot of series. Didn't end a whole lot of series though. My next graph, my histogram of the year published. Most of what I read was published in 2021. I do my histogram in 5-year bins, which is why at the bottom you see 2025 because starts in 2021, goes to 2025. So yes, most of what I read was new releases. And then the next graph I'll show is the format breakdown of how I read this year. The largest portion of what I read was audiobook, followed by ebook, and then hardback, paperback, and then a little bit of comics, which is in stark contrast to 2020 when like 90% of what I read was ebook. But I did branch out a little bit this year. I started, collecting books, so I have a lot more hardbacks and whatnot. So I think that's kind of why we're seeing a bit of a difference. I also became obsessed with audiobooks, which is another large difference as compared to last year. And then finally, I think what I will end with is my Gantt chart. I do not know how I am going to show this to you guys. So I'm just gonna kind of talk through it, and hopefully editing Adriana will figure out a good way to present this information, because I can barely fit my Gantt chart on my giant 4K monitor. So I don't know how I'm gonna figure it out on here. But this is one of my favorite kind of things I do with my spreadsheet. It's so satisfying to look at all of the books I read, and especially in comparison to 2020 and 2019, how much faster I'm reading books and how much more I get to enjoy new stories. The color differences are for books I read with my eyeballs versus audiobooks. So the orange is eyeball reads in whatever format, whether that be ebook, hardback, paperback, whatever. And then the purple is audiobooks. But yeah, it doesn't really convey a whole lot of information besides books that took me a while to get through for one reason or another, but I do enjoy this graph. It's very satisfying to me. So that is all the stats I wanted to share with you for my 2021 reading. Let me know if you follow any of these same types of stats, or is there anything else I should be tracking for the new year. I love numbers. Would love more numbers in my life. So thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.